Howdy. Um, when I don't know, I've been reading and sleeping a lot. The two seem to go kind of together. Now I really love to read, and but anyway, I recently finished this Ben Bova, Return to Mars. At some point or another, and it took me a little while to be sure of this, I had read the prequel to this, Mars, which I don't know if I still have. It could be tucked in over there where I drop books that I've read that I want to keep. I think it's more likely that I actually dumped it on my move from Phoenix. Like when I moved the final stuff up here. But and one of the reasons was the thing I was most interested in the book was left for this book, which is the main character discovers, I guess he's the main character, they do switch to other characters' views at times, but he discovers what he thinks may be intelligent life or signs of intelligent life that had been on Mars at one point or another, at one point in the past. And that exploration is left for this book as he's leaving, he leaves Mars with it off the radar. I don't remember that book terribly well. It's been like, what I think happened is I think I read it back in Phoenix, and so, we're talking maybe 6-7 years ago. But then I picked this up in one of the little free libraries or whatever and read through this. And one of the big things about the other one was I believe I had a hardbound copy. Now, I do not like hardbound books as much. They take up more space, they're a pain in the ass. Reading in the tub or lying down or whatever, they're harder to cope with. They tend to have bigger print, which might be a good thing for me now, especially since I wear these older glasses and not the ones that are best for reading all the time. But I've just always tended to like paperbacks better, even though they're more fragile or whatever. And so I think the combination of the type of book that it was and the actual medium, the hardbound, more annoying thing to read was probably led me to put it aside and just say, I'm not going to reread this. I don't need to keep everything. Ben Bova is an interesting author. Trying to think, I don't think I've read any of his novels before. I'm most used to him for short stories, but even more than that, as an anthologist and editor of other people's work. The writing in this, and as far as I recall, the other one, is good. It's modern. It feels like, you could be looking at sort of a modern adventure type story of any sort. The science fiction aspect of it is hard science fiction, which lends more to that kind of, like a modern thriller, spy thriller or something like that. It's all very believable stuff, right? This was written in 98, and it's using the information that we knew about Mars at that point. More modern, there might be some things that are less uh, believable. I didn't find anything with my limited knowledge that I'm like, oh, well, we know that's not the case now. uh, the technology used both to reach Mars and for the expeditions on Mars are almost all were available at that point. There's one that might not be that I can think of. And some of them, like they're bringing a relatively small nuclear plant with them, which, if we can power a sub with a nuclear engine, it probably is not an unreasonable thing. The transit time, they don't go into the technology of the space travel itself. The transit time to Mars is a little fast, but not ridiculously so. Like, without going into the details of the technology, there are technologies that are still proposed that could get us there in, I think they're looking at like a 5-month trip. But we're not there yet, as far as I know. One of the things that kind of led me to say discard the other one is that it does read kind of like, a modern adventure story, like a spy thriller, or whatever you want to put in there. It's well written and everything in that sense, but it doesn't have sort of, I don't know, there's something about the thing that draws me to science fiction is quite often the broad social commentary, maybe utopian, dystopian type ideas, how big changes would impact what that social fabric is, and so things like Dune, which I didn't really enjoy that much, but the Foundation series, a lot of the earlier Heinlein stuff, a lot of that appeals to me in a very different sort of way. When you get into the hard science fiction, well, a lot of the older hard science fiction, like when it first started coming out, as there was the era of the pulps and the what do you want to say, the space opera type stuff, which laid the broad strokes of technology without going into detail with them, the same way these sort of more social science fiction did. Those kind of stories tended to just feel kind of silly to me, but after that came the hard science fiction, which was, hey, here's the technology. It's stuff that we can see on the horizon, and we can explain it. This doesn't go into a hell of a lot of detail on the explanations, but everything is believable, and the things that are referenced are real, which is appealing, right? The old hard science fiction tended to go too much into the detail of the technologies. I would much rather that be just sort of backdrop dressing, the same way as it is the same way as the technology is in the space opera, or it is in the in those broader science fiction stories that I do enjoy the most. And so it doesn't intrude itself, It's kind of like going into the details. Let's say you had a kind of let's say you had a spy thriller type thing, but they kept going into the details of a particular guns firing mechanism and all this. That would be like the old hard science fiction was, where they'd go into everything and try to explain it all and sell you on it all. Here, it's just taken for granted. It's not heavily discussed or anything, but it's clear that Bova is up on and is conforming to what we know as real. What about the actual story? So, I'm going to kind of, well, I already have, spoil the Mars book. One of the things in it, among a bunch of trials and troubles that the exploration has, both interpersonal and versus nature, is that the main character, well, there's a couple of things. They discover life on Mars. Nothing exciting. It would be huge, right? But they discover like this lichen that's growing, okay, in a deep canyon. And they discover, the main character discovers what looks like it might be, it's something that reminds him of sort of the Pueblo villages. Up in the cave people, not cave people, but the, I can't remember, the Anasazi or something like that, who built, carved out villages in caves, essentially. And in this one, the main character has not been able to convince anybody of this thing he glimpsed, but he's certain of. But they are returning to Mars because they discovered life. And there are a couple of key places that they wanted to explore that hadn't been hit on the last thing. Other potential sources of life or of interesting geology or whatever. And so they're heading for a longer mission. Some of it's about the politics that got him into the mission at an older age. Some of it is, and he was kind of lucky to be in the first mission. He was not the first choice in the first mission, but he kind of takes over as the leader of the first mission. Here he's sent as the leader. Then it goes in a lot into interpersonal relationships between these various, explorers, essentially, and the troubles that they face, the difficulties that the environment provides for them, the difficulties of their interpersonal relationships. Same kind of thing, same kind of story as the original, as far as I remember the original. Definitely remember this, I just read it. And, it's a good read. It really is. And I think I'm going to keep this one. It's possible I have the other one tucked away in the area that I'll probably never get back to reading. But I'm just like, well, look, I'll read every book that I have, and it goes either out the door or stays here. And unfortunately, more than half of them are staying here, which is not what I intend. I was hoping to trim it down to, maybe 20 or 30 books that I keep that are rereadable. But I keep saying, hey, I enjoyed this. I might want to reread it. This worked fine when I was reading more before the interwebs, and, I was 13 years old or whatever, and would run through a book like this a day, very easily. But now I'm not reading that much, and not just because of my addiction, but for a lot of reasons, really. But a lot of it is just having, something on, like a news show or something on constantly. Where I'm not just lazing about reading and dozing off regularly. And even this, it took me, several days to read. So yeah, I found it an enjoyable book. if you know, it's not, again, it's not going to be that sort of big science fiction, uh, broad picture of, you know, a spacefaring empire or anything like that. It's very much this within reach exploration type story, and there's some twists and turns in it, and it's interesting and all that. However, it isn't, you know, it isn't the stuff that really, really grabs me and pushes me over. And it also, I don't find myself really liking the characters in particular. Um, they're not dislikable. It's not a matter of that. They're all believable. When I, for me to really like a character in that sort of way, they almost have to be extreme. And I'm not talking about one-sided or anything like that. I'm talking about these seem pedestrian, totally believable. It's kind of the definition of pedestrian, right? But you know, they could be in any book. Compare that to like I don't know. I'm thinking some of the characters. Well, I picked up one of the Donaldson books, um, and the character painted the original, the Lord Falls Bane trilogy. One of the books from that, and I think I have like two of the three I've collected back. I loved the main character in that. I can't even remember the name of him, but he just hated himself so much and refused to accept the reality that he was being faced with and everything. That was just beautiful to me. But there are others, a couple of the children main characters that say Orson Scott Card puts forward that are just Ender's Game is one of them. For Ender, he comes across as just this. There's something so powerful in how he's presented. I don't know that he's. I mean, there's clearly things that are weird about him, and same thing with Covenant, Thomas Covenant, for for the Donaldson series. Uh, in each of those cases, these are characters who are powerful in their own ways. Also, the Songbird book by Card, where they really kind of come in and you sort of are embraced by them. There was Stephen King as well, where the character was so powerful that and this was the bad guy, that it sort of took me over, right? Donaldson did the same thing. The Card one's not so much, but where I started inheriting traits from the character of the book that I'm reading. And I always find that impressive. Now, each of those are very dramatic characters. I would say Faulkner, some of his characters sometimes are powerfully written enough that I latch onto them. And there's nothing, you know, nothing magical and nothing superpowered about them. There's just maybe some of their traits or whatever just sort of build into my being for a period after I've read the books. There's nothing like that here. I mean, these characters just don't. The main character, you're just like, okay. The only thing he has that sort of is different or differentiates him, well, he's a scientist, but that doesn't really come through very strong. The thing that really differentiates him is that he's Native American heritage, and his grandfather, though I think he starts out as his uncle, but I'm not sure. His grandfather knows some of the tales, you know, of his people and speaks to them. And so it's like he hasn't been brought up very heavily as a Native American. He comes across as not so much that, but with some memories that fit into that, that he draws upon, and they kind of, in a lot of ways, because where the reservation was in Arizona, I think, there's similarities between the land there and the land in Mars, so he kind of is making connections in that way, etc. Anyway, it's an enjoyable book, and one that I will keep, and kind of hope that I did keep the other one, even though I'm afraid I didn't, because it would be nice to read them back to back. I often tend not to be able to do that anymore, just because my books are kind of a jumbled mess. My games I keep organized, but my books not so much. It kind of happened. It's kind of funny because when I was young, I used to know, just like I kind of did with my games for a long time. Now sometimes I lose track of where something is, but I used to know exactly where to find a book on my bookshelves, and then I gave most of my books to my first wife, and so those are all gone. And since then, I've generally not had a hell of a lot of books. I pick them up, used or whatever. I didn't have very many. I tried to keep what I had that I'd reread, but I wasn't reading very much. And since, especially since I moved here, where there are a lot of these little free library things around, I've been picking up a lot more books. And so, I don't know, in terms of total number, my collection of books has grown quite a bit. It's probably the size that it used to be. But it's like with my games, all in boxes, but the boxes aren't just they aren't set up, I've got kind of shelves of boxes up here with my games. With my books, it's like multiple boxes deep. So it's kind of possible that book may be still squirreled away in those boxes. I did look for it. It's also possible that it's behind some of my game boxes. Anyway, it was an enjoyable read. I would definitely, recommend picking it up if you find it for free. Cheers.